Ravnica Remastered compiles cards from every set on Ravnica and even some that aren't to make a very fun draft experience and a collector's product to get needed reprints into players' hands. But they obviously couldn't fit all the cards that have ever been on Ravnica, so I thought it'd be interesting to look at the 10 biggest cards that they didn't put in the set that definitely could have been because they were either in a past Ravnican set or have Ravnican art similar to Bruvac and Krenko from the main set. Let's jump right into this. Starting with number 10, Assassin's Trophy. It's a 2-cost black and green instant that destroys target permanent an opponent controls, and its controller may search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle their library. This is an incredibly versatile removal spell that sees play in CEDH, Modern, Legacy, Vintage, pretty much every format, and it's only going for $7.31, but it is a highly played card from Ravnica, so I am a little bit disappointed that it didn't get included in the set. I love when cards that actually see play get reprinted because it helps players get their hands on cards that are actually good, actually playable, and will not just sit in their collection and instead sit in a deck. Next up, number 9 is Rakdos the Showstopper. It's a 6-cost black and red 6/6 with flying and trample, and when it enters the battlefield, you flip a coin for each creature that isn't a demon, devil, or imp and destroy each creature whose coin comes up tails. Unlike Assassin's Trophy, this doesn't see a ton of play in a ton of formats, but it is a popular commander as it is a very fun and flashy effect that wants you to build a demon, devil, and imp deck and kind of have this asymmetrical board wipe in the command zone. It's currently going for $7.38, which is still pretty pricey, and getting people commanders, especially in new treatments, is really fun, but my guess is this wasn't included in the set because we got Rakdos Lord of Riots, which is the more fun and more needed reprint of a card, so it makes sense they didn't want 2 different Rakdoses in the set taking up slots. Next up, number 8 is Song of the Worldsoul. This is a 6-cost white enchantment that says whenever you cast a spell, populate. What's really interesting about this is that it's not actually from a Ravnican set, but the card clearly takes place on Ravnica and uses a Ravnica mechanic. It's similar to Karlov of the Ghost Council, which was originally in a commander deck and got reprinted into the set. I would love reprints like these. They are from decks that only saw one printing ever, and so they can creep up in price despite not being that amazing of cards, and so it would be great to see that reprint. It's currently going for $7.49. Next up, number 7 is God Eternal Oketra. This is a 5-cost white legendary 3/6 with double strike that makes it so whenever you cast a creature spell, you make a 4/4 with vigilance, and whenever it dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you can put it into its owner's library third from the top. The card isn't super competitively playable. It was played in Modern and Legacy this year a very tiny amount, but it's mostly a commander card that just gives you a ton of value if you care about sacrificing creatures or casting lots of creatures, and it is pretty resilient and can be your commander. So there are a lot of factors going into its $7.62 price, but I feel like the main reason this was excluded is that it feels like a War of the Spark card, and Ravnica Remastered clearly is focusing on the idea of the guilds and kind of all of the sets except War of the Spark. While there are cards from War of the Spark, the set definitely focuses around that guild idea, and God Eternal Oketra doesn't really fit into the world of Ravnica and would probably require reprinting the entire cycle to not make it feel weird. Next up, number 6 is Mazirek Kraul Death Priest. It's a 5-cost black and green 2/2 that whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. This doesn't see any play in any competitive formats, but in Commander, it's a really great commander, and it can go in a lot of decks to give a lot of value if you are sacrificing things and are in kind of an aristocrat-style deck. Plus, it cares about whenever any player sacrifices another permanent, and so with cards like fetch lands and other cards that just sacrifice themselves, this can generate a lot of value in a game. This is another one that's really interesting as it was never in a Ravnican set, but clearly is a Golgari card set on the plane of Ravnica, and so because of that, it definitely could have been fit into the set, although unlike Song of the Worldsoul, this has seen a couple reprints since its original Commander debut. Although despite that, it's still going for $8.83. Number 5 is Worldspine Wurm. This is an 11 cost, but that doesn't really matter. 15/15 with trample, and when it dies, you create 3 5/5 worm tokens, and if it would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, you shuffle it into its owner's library. This is a card that pretty much exclusively sees play in Pioneer and Explorer in the Indomitable Creativity deck, allowing you to cheat it out and Xenagos to swing for the win right after you cast it. It's a very good card in those decks, but outside of that, it doesn't see a ton of play. Because it sees pretty heavy play in Pioneer, it goes for about $9.85, and it would have been a great way to get more players interested by giving them cards for formats of all types, including Pioneer with this one. Number 4 is Smothering Tithe, a 4-cost white enchantment that whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2, and if that player doesn't, you get to create a treasure token. But you probably already knew that, and you probably know that this is one of the biggest commander staples in the game. Pretty much every white deck wants this as an amazing source of ramp and an annoyance to your opponents, and it's a pretty valuable card going for $18.91. However, it was going for a lot more before it got double reprinted this last year in Commander Masters and as an Enchanting Tale in in Wilds of Eldraine. Because of that, that's my biggest theory as to why it's not in this set. It seems like one of those cards that would drive sales, but my guess is they don't want to cradle the price too hard, as it's one of those chase cards that gets people interested in sets, and they feel like if they triple reprint it almost back to back to back, it would cradle the price a little too hard. Although it would have been great to see a card that pretty much needs to go in every white deck get another reprint and help people get their hands on it. Next up, the third biggest card that they didn't add in Ravnica Remastered is Finale of Devastation. This is an X green sorcery that has you search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with mana value X or less and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, you shuffle, and if X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X/+X and haste until end of turn. This is one of the best green tutors in the entire game, not only letting you get whatever creature you want from your deck, but also putting it onto the battlefield. And if it's late enough in the game that you can pump a bunch of mana into it, it'll give that creature haste and boost up your whole board. This kind of does everything a green card should in Commander, and so it makes sense that the card is pretty pricey, going for $23.95. Just one of those generically good cards that if you have creatures in your deck that you like, you probably want to put this in your deck as well to both end games and get some more consistency. As for why they didn't reprint this, I think there's a bunch of reasons. First off, it was just reprinted in Commander Masters. Second, it's a card from War of the Spark that definitely feels War of the Sparky and a little less guildy. And third, it's part of a cycle, and so if they just reprint this one, it feels a little awkward, and they may be encouraged to reprint all 5, now taking up 5 card slots to just include this one. Next up, number 2 is Mana Confluence. This is a land that enters the battlefield untapped and lets you tap and pay a life to add 1 mana of any color. Now you might be saying, wait a second, this is not from Ravnica, and you're right, but there is art of it on Ravnica from Commander Legends, so much so that it actually has Teysa Karlov's quote on it, and according to their rules this is fair game because a couple of the cards are the same way, where they weren't originally Ravnican cards, but they had a reprint with a version on it, whether that be a promo or a card from another set. In this case, it's from Commander Legends. In formats with higher life totals, it really doesn't matter that you're paying a life, and it taps for mana of any color and comes in untapped. It's just so consistent. You don't have to worry about it coming in tapped sometimes. You don't need to worry about it not tapping for the right colors of mana. This just ensures you that you will get your mana, assuming you're not at like 3 life. It's also a pretty pricey card, going for $32.69, and I know a lot of people feel like Ravnica Remastered didn't have enough value in it, and this would have been another great chase card to add to help people build out their mana bases in addition to the Shocklands. It could have even gone in the mana slot that they talked about, although I guess it doesn't feel too Ravnican-y and maybe shouldn't be in that slot, but I think it's a really great inclusion that could have been a nice extra chase card to get. And finally, the biggest card that didn't make the cut for Ravnica Remastered that could have been reprinted is Doubling Season. It's a 5-cost green enchantment that doubles all tokens you make and doubles all counters you put on things. This is a very good card that going into 2023 was almost $100, as it was amazing in token decks, really good in counter decks, and especially good in Planeswalker decks, allowing most Planeswalkers to ultimate right away. Before 2023, it hadn't seen a ton of reprints. It was in things like Battle Bond, but originally it was from a Ravnican set, and so it definitely could have been in Ravnica Remastered. I think the biggest reason it wasn't was because it was in 2 sets this year as well, being in both Commander Masters and an Enchanting Tale. It had the same thing that happened to Smothering Tithe happened to it, and it's crashed all the way down to $40.68, which is still a lot of value, but I again think they don't want a triple reprint, especially considering it was just so recently last year. Those are the 10 biggest cards that weren't in Ravnica Remastered that totally could have been there according to Wizards' own rules. I want to know your thoughts on all this in the comments down below, and are there any cards that you wish were in Ravnica Remastered that just didn't make the cut? If you want to see more content from me now, check out this video where I talk about 5 precons you should pick up right now, and check out this video where I talk about the true price of serialized cards. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.